Are the super rich actually miserable, or are we all just a bunch of haters? Zoe Williams writes for The Guardian that the Murdochs and their recent legal battle are proof that these lives are not enviable. It seems something that not super rich people say to pacify themselves, to make themselves feel better, that those people may look like they've got everything, but I bet they're secretly really unhappy and lonely and weird. Perhaps, but it's all relative. If they're unhappy and we're unhappy, then wouldn't it be better to be unhappy with all of that money? Well, to quote someone who I probably shouldn't be quoting anymore, more money, more problems. When a giant estate has been built up over years and generations, what does one do with it? It becomes more of a burden and responsibility than anything fun, especially when we're talking about the 1% of the 1%. They built their wealth in business and then grew it with influence. In the case of the Murdochs, the question of what to do with that massive wealth and influence was the subject of a contentious succession trial between patriarch Rupert Murdoch and his adult children.
Control over Rupert Murdoch's media empire now to be decided.
Any comment, Mr. Murdoch? Why the secrecy in the case?
Not by him, but in a Reno, Nevada courtroom. The 93-year-old tycoon wanting to protect the conservative leanings of his media portfolio, which includes Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, and New York Post, is now trying to change the terms of an irrevocable family trust. The trust was created after Murdoch's divorce from his second wife, giving equal control of his company to his 4 children at the time. But the New York Times reporting that the family fell out over political disagreements after Murdoch and his oldest son Lachlan allegedly pushed Fox News further to the right when Donald Trump was president.
And if this sounds like the plot of the show Succession, it's because the Roys were loosely based on the Murdochs. The battle over who would take over their father's media empire raged both while he was alive and after he was killed off, with Logan Roy failing to name any one of his children as his successor prior to his sudden death. For Rupert Murdoch, he sought to essentially reclaim portions of his media empire that had already been promised to 3 of his adult children. He wanted to give all of it to his son Lachlan, who is the closest to his father in terms of business interests and political leanings. The other children are less Trumpy, less climate denialist, and less terrible. But regarding the fictionalized version of the wealthy that we often see in television dramas like Succession, but also Big Little Lies, Billions, and more, sociologist Roland Atkinson said in a piece that these shows present a life that has almost removed itself from society. Staggering wealth now represents the ability to escape rather than be noticed. In her piece in The Guardian, Williams writes, "The love of money corrodes these people. Their greed destroys their human connections, their luxury stupefies them, and they're all, from Succession to White Lotus, incredibly unhappy, flattered and coddled by a rolling cast of servants that represents society as a whole. They don't notice us and they hate each other." And this is sort of what I was talking about in a previous video about the CEO of United, Andrew Whitty, when people were rightfully shocked at how out of touch he is with the American people who have been victimized by his company and others like it. They don't notice us. All of the backlash is not anything they need to be concerned about, because as long as people keep paying into the system, which they will because at present they don't have much choice otherwise, then the company can continue to function. Business as usual will largely go uninterrupted, so who cares if the people are upset? There's still money to be made. Sure, they lost one CEO, but that was just a one-off. It's not anything that any of them really needs to be concerned about. The voices of millions of Americans aren't worth as much as the greed and entitlement of a handful of millionaires and billionaires. But to that question as to whether or not these rich people are actually happy, Williams writes, "Why are the younger Roys so catastrophically unhappy? Why are they beset by anxiety, polyaxed by addiction, crushed by self-doubt, coarsened by sociopathy, incapable of intimacy?" It's been pretty well known that unequal societies don't just make those at the bottom less happy, but corrode well-being in every decile. Is it because it destroys your sense of purpose and challenge to be born into wealth in the first place? Does hoarding money demand a learned callousness to the plight of others, which gets to you in the end? Is there some other factor that only fellow billionaires will be aware of? It doesn't really matter why. This is settled social science. I'm rewatching Downton Abbey right now, which is another one of those shows that makes some effort to glamorize the lifestyle of the super rich. And I actually started rewatching it because I wanted to pay closer attention this time to the societal structure that the Crawleys existed within and fought to perpetuate, even though the world was beginning to move on without them. In that show, the creator took pains to portray the Crawleys as being exceptionally kind and just toward their household staff. Otherwise, it would have been an uncomfortable show to watch with half of the cast utterly unlikable. But in shows like Succession, there wasn't a single likable character. They were amusing and they were interesting, but they weren't likable. Even the ones who simply worked for the company but weren't part of the Roy family, they did their parts to ensure that the company was socially and politically relevant, even if that was at the expense of the American people the company claimed to serve. With the assassination of the United Health CEO, we're finally beginning to see some solidarity amongst working class and would-be middle-class Americans. I know here at TYT we've been saying for a long time that we're all fighting for the disenfranchised, not just the left-leaning ones. We've been long talking about how the political divide amongst Americans isn't left versus right, it's top versus bottom. And one of those sides is comically smaller than the other, but that's the side that's winning. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if the wealthy are happy or miserable, because either way, they're going to ensure, whether directly or indirectly, intentionally or apathetically, that none of us are happy either. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.